And I rise today to celebrate the life of Harriet Tubman and the establishment of the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historical Park. Harriet Tubman was an American hero who championed freedom, most famously known as the leader of the Underground Railroad, whose roots were on the eastern shore of Maryland. Harriet Tubman was an iconic figure in our nation's history, for whom liberty and freedom were not just ideas, but were God-given rights that she fought tirelessly and at great personal peril to spread to others in bondage. The woman who is known to us as Harriet Tubman was born in approximately 1822 in Dorchester County, Maryland, and given the name Arminta Minty Ross. Born into slavery, she spent nearly 30 years of her life toiling for various families on Maryland's eastern shore. Even as a young enslaved girl, she demonstrated impressive mental and physical strength. One of her jobs was to set and check muskrat traps, swamps of the Blackwater River during blazing hot summer and freezing cold winters. Even though Harriet was slight in physical stature, she frequently worked with the men in the forest, cutting timber and carrying logs. It was in this work setting, where both free and enslaved people worked together in harvesting timber, that she first heard stories about what life was like for free blacks in northern states. As a teenage slave, one of her first acts of defiance was sticking up for an enslaved boy who was being harassed by a shopkeeper. In helping the boy out of this situation, she took a serious blow to the head when the shopkeeper threw a lead weight that struck her in the head. Tubman recalled later in life that the mark of the weight on her skull never fully healed, and after this incident, she would see visions that later inspired her to escape slavery. As an adult, she took the first name Harriet, and when she was 24 years old, she married John Tubman. In her late 20s, Harriet Tubman escaped from slavery in 1849. She fled in the dead of night, navigating the maze of tidal streams and wetlands that to this day comprise the eastern shore landscape. She did so alone, demonstrating courage, strength, and fortitude that became her hallmark. Not satisfied with attaining her own freedom, she returned repeatedly for more than 10 years to the places of her enslavement in Dorchester and Caroline counties, where under the most adverse conditions, she led away many family members and other slaves to freedom in the northeastern United States and Canada. She helped develop the complex network of safe houses and recruited abolitionist sympathizers residing along secret routes connecting the southern slave states and northern free states. No one knows exactly how many people she led to freedom or the number of trips between the north and south she led, but the legend of her work was an inspiration to the multitude of slaves seeking freedom and to abolitionists fighting to end slavery. Tubman became known as the Moses of her people by African Americans and white abolitionists alike. Tubman once proudly told Frederick Douglass that in all her journeys, she never lost a single passenger. She was so effective that in 1856, there was a $40,000 reward offered for her capture in the South. She is the most famous and the most important conductor of the network of resistance known as the Underground Railroad. But Tubman was more than a conductor of the Underground Railroad. She was a scout and a spy for the Union Army. She was active in the women's suffrage movement after the Civil War. And ultimately, she served aging African Americans by running a home for the aged in Auburn, New York. In 1903, she bequeathed the Tubman home to the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in Auburn, where it stands to this day. Just this month, I was able to attend the midwinter meeting of the Board of Bishops, International Ministry and Lay Association of the AME Zion Church, where we honored Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Tubman. The AME Zion Church, or the Freedom Church as many refer to it, was an important part of Harriet Tubman's life and was involved in the forefront of both the abolition and civil rights movement. She was a dedicated member of the church and actively supported the construction of the Thompson AME Church in Auburn, New York, where she was laid in state after her death. Harriet Tubman died in Auburn in 1913, and she's buried in the Fort Hill Cemetery. Fortunately, many of the structures and landmarks in New York remain intact in relatively good condition. For the past 7 years, I've championed legislation to establish the creation of the Harriet Tubman Historical Parks in Maryland and New York. The creation of these parks has been years in the making and long overdue, and I am very grateful the support of my colleagues gave this bill in the last Congress. Recently, I was able to celebrate this park's formal designation during a ceremonial event at the Harriet Tubman Museum and Educational Center in Cambridge, New York, just a few miles from where she grew up. I was able to meet some of Harriet Tubman's descendants, which were incredibly meaningful to me. I was so pleased to say that Harriet Tubman's legacy will live on in these parks. My co-sponsors and I all share a deep appreciation for how establishing this park is preserving the legacy of this remarkable historic figure in American history, but also to show how important this park will be to communities where they are located. Every February, our nation's children learn lessons about the many contributions that African Americans have made to our democracy and to the growth and prosperity of our nation. Preserving places significant to Harriet Tubman's life story for future generations to come and see and experience creates a learning opportunity that our kids and grandkids just can't get in the classroom or learn from a textbook. The park will educate the public about the historical significance of the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman's early life, and also are expected to increase tourism, create jobs, and strengthen local economies. The final passage of this bill to create the park was the result of unyielding bipartisan efforts, including from Representative Andy Harris, Senator Mikulski, and me, along with our partners from New York, Senator Schumer, Gillibrand, and former Secretary Clinton, when she represented New York in this body, along with Congressman Dan Maffei and Richard Hanna. So this effort was a bipartisan effort and involved members from both New York and Maryland. The effort on this legislation was started by my predecessor, Senator Sarbanes, when he passed legislation commissioning the National Service to conduct a special resource study on Harriet Tubman. The establishment of the National Historic Park commemorating the life of Harriet Tubman and protecting the serene and nearly unchanged landscape is an ideal way to celebrate and honor the outstanding life and incredible work of Harriet Tubman, while establishing an important destination for tourists to come visit, learn, and experience Maryland's Eastern Shore. The vision for the Tubman National Historical Parks is to preserve the places significant to the life of Harriet Tubman and tell her story through interpretive activities, while continuing to discover aspects of her life and the experiences of passage along the Underground Railroad through the archaeological research and discovery. The buildings and structures of Maryland are mostly disappeared. Slaves were forced to live in primitive buildings, even though many slaves were skilled tradesmen who constructed the substantial homes of their owners. Not surprisingly, few of these structures associated with the early years of Tubman's life remain standing today. The landscape on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, however, is still as it was when Harriet Tubman lived. Farm fields and pine forests dotted the lowland landscape, which is also notable for its extensive network of tidal rivers and wetlands that Tubman and the people she guided to freedom under the cover of night. In particular, a number of places significant to Tubman's life, including the homestead of Ben Ross, her father, Stewart's Canal, where he worked, the Broadus Farm, where she worked as a slave, and others were within the master plans of the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge. Similarly, Poplar Neck, the plantation from which she escaped from, is still largely intact in Caroline County. The properties in Talbot County immediately across the Choptank River from the plantation are currently protected by various conservation easements. Were she alive today, Tubman would recognize much of the landscape that she knew intimately as she secretly led freedom seekers of all ages to the north. This park helps connect people today to America's history. Only recently has the Park Service begun establishing units dedicated to the lives of African Americans. Places like Booker T. Washington National Monument on the campus of Tuskegee University in Alabama, the George Washington Carver National Monument in Missouri, the National Historic Trail commemorating the March for Voting Rights from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, and most recently the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in the Mall, are important monuments and places of historical significance that help tell the story of the African American experience. As the national park system continues its important work to commemorate and preserve African American history by providing greater public access and information about the places and people that have shaped the African American experience, there are very few units dedicated to the lives of African American women. This historic park is the first national park in honor of a woman. Now, obviously, the first historical park for an African American woman. As we celebrate Black History Month and Women's History Month next month, I cannot think of a more fitting hero than Harriet Tubman to be the first African American woman to be memorialized with a national historic park. These parks tell both her personal story and her lifelong fight for justice and freedom, starting with her fight against the cruel institution of slavery and the establishment of the Underground Railroad that she led to her work in the women's suffrage movement. I would encourage my colleagues to seek inspiration from the heroes of your own state and work to preserve the physical remnants of their legacy so that future generations of Americans might know better who helped form this great nation.